My daughter-in-law calls me the senile old woman, but perhaps she's the one who's forgotten where love ends and greed begins. My name is Marion Reed. I'm 67 years old. I once believed that if I were kind enough, patient enough, then family would always be the safest place on earth. But one day, I came home after visiting my sister and couldn't open the door to my own house. The lock was cold as ice, and behind that door were my son, whom I loved, and the woman who had taken everything from me. In the name of taking care of mother, they'd signed a contract of betrayal, one that turned me into a stranger inside the very home I had built with 40 years of labor. Yet there are things they could never take. Not the money, not the roof over my head, but something I've guarded until my last breath: the dignity and the soul of a mother. This is my story, a journey through betrayal, a winter I had to survive to find a warmth no one could ever steal again. Stay with me till the end, because if you've ever been hurt, misunderstood, or cast out from the very home you called your own, you'll understand. Sometimes, even a cracked teacup can hold the warmth of an entire lifetime. And don't forget to subscribe, because after every story comes a small lesson about trust, awakening, and how those who seem the weakest often become the strongest when they have nothing left to lose. I'm Marion Reed, and I was coming home after 2 weeks visiting my sister in Salem. The afternoon bus rolled through rows of pine trees glazed in ice, so quiet I could hear the tires grinding against the frozen road. I'd always hated Oregon's cold, but that day it felt almost gentle, as if the frost outside was still easier to face than the chill waiting inside my own home. When the bus stopped at the small road leading into the woods, I pulled my worn suitcase from the compartment. The air was thick with the smell of snow and damp wood. The walk home was barely 300 meters, yet that day it felt endless. Wind slapped against my face, every breath turning into a pale cloud. I chuckled to myself. Welcome home, Marion. Then I saw it. My wooden house appearing through the pines. The white paint was peeling, the porch blanketed with snow. That place had once been my entire world, every nail, every brick, paid for with 40 years of quiet labor and frugality. I paused at the steps, my gloves stiff with frost, my heart beating just a little too fast. Strange, I thought. I'd come home hundreds of times before. Why did it feel like I was standing in front of someone else's door? I slid the key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. Maybe the cold had frozen it, I thought, and tried again, gently. Nothing. I drew a long breath, twisted harder. A dry metallic sound. Still locked. I wiped the key on my coat, tried again. Still no movement, as if the door itself had forgotten its owner. Somewhere behind me, a branch cracked in the wind. I turned, nothing but white snow fading into fog. A chill crept up my back and settled at my neck. I tried one last time. The metal felt like it was betraying me, frozen and unyielding. I pressed my gloved hand to the doorknob. The cold pierced through the fabric, making my fingers tremble. Come on, I muttered under my breath, forcing down my irritation. The key clicked once, then stopped, as if someone inside was holding it still. My heart jolted. I froze, then looked up toward the upstairs window. A faint yellow light flickered there. I was certain I'd turned off every light before leaving. Wind slammed against the porch. The old wooden sign, Reed Family, since 1991, rattled softly, an eerie clatter in the silence. I drew in another breath, slid the key in again, slower this time, as if I were trying to unlock not a door, but the past itself. Click. A clean, sharp sound, and the door gave way. Before I could even smile, a wave of warm air spilled out, carrying a scent that wasn't mine. Sweet, heavy, expensive. Not the cinnamon candles I always used. And there, framed in the doorway, stood a figure. Light from inside cast a glow around her, making the snow at my feet shimmer. She wore a long gray coat, her hair tied neatly, eyes cold and bright like a frozen lake. I recognized her instantly. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. She stood there, elegant and composed, her perfume lingering in the air. And in that moment, the way she looked at me made it clear. This house was no longer mine. I nodded slightly, my breath turning into a thin veil of smoke in the frozen air. "Hello, dear," I said, my voice roughened, not just by the cold, but by something I couldn't yet name. Vanessa tilted her head, her eyes unreadable. "Mother," she said softly, her tone smooth but distant. "Things have changed. This is our home now." I froze. Those words landed clearly, each one falling into the snow like shards of broken ice. Her voice wasn't angry, nor apologetic, just calm in a way that cut straight through bone. "Where's Jacob?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. "He's resting. I don't want to wake him." Her words came light, almost casual, like she was explaining why a vase belonged on a different shelf. I glanced past her through the half-open door. The living room was unrecognizable. The wedding photo I once hung was gone, replaced by a massive abstract painting. The walls had a new coat of paint. The sofa was different, and the warm yellow lamps had turned into cold white light. The scent of my cinnamon candles had been smothered by something else. Pine and vanilla, sweet, thick, and suffocating. "You changed the furniture?" I asked quietly. "We just wanted to brighten things up, Mother." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile people wear when they're certain they're in control. I said nothing. A sharp gust swept across the porch, scattering snow into my open palms. My fingers, stiff and trembling, gripped my handbag tighter. The cold crawled up to my wrist, where inside the bag lay the small cracked teacup I'd bought at last year's Christmas market, a gift I had meant to bring to Sophie. Vanessa's gaze dropped to my hand. For a moment, I saw a flicker of false sympathy in her eyes. "You should rest," she said gently. "You must be tired from the trip." I looked at her, the light from the house glinting in her eyes that no longer held a trace of warmth. Maybe it was by accident, or maybe not, but as I stepped back, my shoulder brushed the doorframe. A small ache shot through me, enough to wake me up. I opened my bag, reaching for my spare key, an old habit, as if a key could fix any of this. My hand trembled. The cracked teacup slipped from my fingers. The porcelain hit the snow with a faint, fragile sound, barely more than a breath breaking. I bent down. The porch light cast a golden glow across the cup, revealing a new fracture, thin, but deeper this time. I stared at it for a long while, and suddenly realized I was standing inside another kind of crack, one that didn't run across porcelain, but across the heart. Vanessa stood there, arms crossed, face calm, untouched. Behind her, the light from inside glowed steady and warm, and yet so unbearably distant. I wanted to speak, but my throat closed up. All I heard was the wind, and within it, the soft, final sound of the door closing. I stood still on the porch, my breath dissolving into the mist and snow. The house, the one I had spent my whole life building, now looked more foreign than any place in the world. In the whiteness, the cracked teacup lay still, collecting snowflakes, cooling slowly, just like the part of my life it once belonged to.
The next morning, I sat in a small cafe beside the gas station, a cup of cappuccino cooling slowly in my hands. Outside,
The snow kept falling, soft, steady, covering the roadside sign that read, "Welcome home." I stared into that endless whiteness and began to tell my story, quietly, to myself. Not to complain, but because I was afraid that if I didn't speak, my memories would be buried beneath the same cold silence that had swallowed my home. When Jacob was little, I worked 3 jobs a day. In the mornings, I cleaned the town's office building, where the smell of bleach clung to my hair until dusk. At noon, I mopped floors and emptied trash bins at a medical clinic, scrubbing away the blood-stained towels no one else wanted to touch. And at night, I washed dishes at the Italian restaurant down the street, surrounded by the sound of knives and chopping boards, the scent of butter and garlic soaked into my clothes. Most nights, I came home after midnight. I'd drop my bag on the chair, kick off my shoes, and sit right down on the wooden floor. My feet swollen, my hands cracked and bleeding. But when I heard Jacob stirring in his room, I smiled. He would always ask, "Mom, are you tired?" And I'd answer, "Just a little dirty, sweetheart. Tired goes away after a night's sleep." I used to joke that every callus on my hand was another brick for our house. Jacob believed me. Maybe I believed it too. I just never realized those bricks would one day build a wall between us. Back then, I had nothing but faith that hard work could save me. I wasn't beautiful, I wasn't educated, but I had endurance, the kind born from refusing to collapse. I saved every bill, taped torn ones together, marked each expense in red ink. On weekends, Jacob and I would sit in the park eating cold sandwiches. I'd tell him, "Someday I'll buy us a house, with a porch, a pine tree, and a place for you to hang the Christmas lights." "Really, Mom?" "Of course, but only if you help me wash the dishes tonight." He'd grin, his little tooth gap flashing in the sun. Those memories, they're what I fought to protect, even after everyone else forgot they ever happened. Once, while I was scrubbing the clinic floor, a young nurse looked down at me and said, "Marion, why don't you retire? Someone your age should have someone to take care of her." I wiped the sweat from my brow and smiled. I'm the one doing the taking care. I don't regret those 40 years. I only regret believing that kindness and sacrifice could keep me safe forever. Outside, the sound of snow pattered gently on the tin roof. I placed my hand over the cup, cold now, untouched. The wooden tabletop reflected the wrinkles and tiny cracks in my skin. I smiled softly. The calluses were still there, proof that I had built something real, not out of wood and nails, but out of love. I bought it with cash, no loans, no help from anyone. The day I signed the contract, my hands shook so much I had to put the pen down twice. The agent, a young woman with a bright smile, said, "You're one of the rare ones who still pay in full these days." I answered softly, "Because I'm afraid of debt, and afraid I won't have enough time to repay it." She didn't understand, but I did. That house was paid for with my youth, with the strength of a woman who had nothing but willpower. When I moved in, I bought a single cream-colored teacup and placed it on the windowsill. I brewed mint tea, watched the steam rise through the afternoon light, and whispered, "This is it." The little house sat quietly among the pine trees. The old wooden floor creaked beneath every step. I remember that first morning. I woke to the sound of a woodpecker tapping on the porch rail, and I cried. Not from loneliness, but because after 40 years, I could finally call a place home. Then I let Jacob and his wife stay, just for a while. "Just temporary, Mom," he said, his arm wrapped around Vanessa. "We'll only be here a few months until we find a place closer to work." I nodded. Who wouldn't want their child close by, especially when you've only got one? I rearranged the living room, laid out new blankets, bought a few extra dishes. Vanessa hugged me, her voice dripping with sweetness. "I'll take good care of you, Mom." They arrived in winter, their SUV crunching through the frozen driveway, cardboard boxes piled up in the hallway. Jacob kissed my forehead, the same gentle gesture he used to give me as a boy, then disappeared upstairs with his wife. I stood alone in the living room, listening to their footsteps echo across the ceiling, and realized the house had suddenly become too small for 3 people, yet emptier inside me than ever before. At first, I was happy. There was conversation at dinner, fresh coffee in the mornings. I thought, maybe this was my reward for 40 years of work, to see my son safe, happy, under the roof I built. But soon, I began to sense something off, a stillness too perfect to be peace. One night I went to the kitchen for tea and heard Vanessa's soft laugh. "Your mom's adorable," she said, like someone straight out of an old movie. Jacob replied something I couldn't make out, then silence. I stood in the dark hallway, hand gripping the railing, unsure if I felt sad or just hollow. I went to bed late that night. Above me, their laughter rippled through the floorboards, mingling with the sound of wind beating against the window. I turned over, closed my eyes, and tried not to think about the small things. But the next morning, I noticed the kitchen cabinets were rearranged. "My cups were here," I said quietly. Vanessa smiled. "I thought they'd be better by the coffee machine, Mom." Her voice was light, helpful. Jacob sat beside her, silent, tapping his fingers on the table. I smiled back, said, "Thank you," out of habit, then stepped outside to sweep the porch. Snow had fallen thick overnight, so white it made my eyes ache. In my head, Jacob's words echoed from days before. Just temporary. Temporary. 2 simple words that cut colder than the winter wind. I looked down at my footprints in the snow, clear at first, then fading as the wind swept across them. And I wondered, how many things in life begin as temporary and end up staying forever? I gathered a handful of snow, the cold biting into my palms. It felt like truth itself. It doesn't kill you all at once. It just numbs you, little by little. The day Jacob introduced her to me, it was early winter in Portland, cold enough to sting the skin. I remember that evening clearly, my breath rising like thin smoke in the air, yet my heart felt strangely warm. Jacob walked into the small diner I often went to, holding a young woman's hand. The golden light from above softened everything, and Vanessa's smile seemed to brighten the whole room. She wore a beige sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She smiled at everyone, the kind of smile that makes you want to believe in it. As she walked toward my table, a draft from the door swept through, as if the wind itself wanted a better look at her face. "Mom," Jacob said, his voice filled with excitement. "This is the person I want to spend my life with." He said it with absolute certainty, eyes shining like a child who'd finally found something too precious to let go. I looked at my son, and pride and fear tangled inside me, that familiar ache of watching someone carry your heart, not knowing what they'll do with it. Vanessa extended her hand. "I'm so happy to meet you," she said, her voice clear and light, with that tone that makes you want to believe she means it. Her hand was soft, warm, and confident, the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you'll be loved. I invited them to sit and ordered a slice of apple pie. While Jacob talked about his job, Vanessa listened closely, her hand resting on his shoulder every now and then. Such a small gesture, but something in me sank a little. Maybe because, for the first time, I realized I wasn't the only one who understood him anymore. She told me she taught yoga, loved baking, and read old novels. "I like simple things too, just like you," she said, her eyes bright, her voice soft and warm enough to touch. I smiled. Who wouldn't, hearing that? When dinner ended, she hugged me, gently, but longer than she needed to. "I hope one day I can love the way you love your son," she whispered. Her perfume lingered, a hint of bergamot and honey, sweet and warm, leaving a trace in the air, as though she'd quietly marked her presence. I remember smiling, a real one, because in that moment I believed her. I believed my son had finally found someone who would love him, listen to him, protect him. I didn't know that while she hugged me, Vanessa was already looking past my shoulder, at the house she'd never entered, but somehow already considered hers. That night, I went home and brewed myself a cup of tea. Outside, the first snow began to fall. I opened the window and let the cold air in. On the table, the lamplight glowed over a framed photo of Jacob as a little boy. Blonde hair, wide smile. "She seems lovely, doesn't she?" I whispered, and I answered myself, "Yes, she does." Then I closed the window, unaware that the warmth I'd felt that night would be the start of a cold that would last for years. I believed in laughter echoing from the kitchen, in the image of the two people I loved most baking apple pie and talking about their future. Vanessa stood beside me, holding a wooden spoon, her cheeks flushed from the oven's heat. She asked me how to keep the dough from clumping. I showed her, slowly and patiently, the way I once showed Jacob how to tie his shoes. "Add a pinch of cinnamon," I said. "Don't be afraid of the spice, it makes the pie warmer." Vanessa nodded, smiling brightly. "Just like you, Mom," she said. I remembered her small words, because they softened even the hardest corners of my heart. I taught her how to bake, how to crimp pie crusts into even little waves, how to wipe the table with a cloth instead of paper towels. One cold morning, I saw her shiver and handed her my old sweater, a pale yellow one, slightly frayed, but I'd loved it because it was warm, and because Jacob once told me, "Mom, you look like sunshine in that color." Vanessa slipped it on, turned toward the mirror, spun once and smiled. "It's beautiful. Maybe I'll just keep it, if that's okay." I laughed. "If you like." Now, when I think back, that line feels like a quiet act of surrender, gentle but dangerous. Time passed and everything seemed peaceful. We had dinner together. Sometimes she even called me Mom, softly, sweetly, just enough to make me believe I'd gained a daughter. But I've learned that trust doesn't usually shatter with a bang. It begins with a hairline crack, silent, hidden deep within. One afternoon, I'd just finished cleaning the kitchen when Vanessa came in. Her hair was tied up, a new perfume floating around her, sharp, floral, unfamiliar. She stood in the middle of the living room, looking around, and with that pleasant, easy smile said, "This sofa's really old, isn't it?" I turned to look. That brown velvet sofa, I'd bought it 10 years ago from a thrift sale. I used to sit there every night, sewing Jacob's clothes, listening to the radio, drifting off as the wind howled against the windows. It wasn't beautiful, but it was part of me. "Yes, it's old," I said quietly, "but it still works." Vanessa smiled, her expression soft, but her eyes were cold. "I just thought maybe we should replace it, to make the house look brighter." I nodded, smiled it off, thinking it was nothing. That evening, she and Jacob dragged the sofa out to the porch, saying they'd give it to someone who needs it. I stood by the window, watching the snow settle over the worn brown fabric, listening to their footsteps, firm, certain against the wooden floor. I didn't say a word. I just made myself a cup of tea, added a drop of honey, and sat in the single chair by the kitchen. In the rising steam, I saw my own reflection, small and blurred in the glass. The fog covered the crack on my teacup for a moment, then revealed it again. I took a sip. The tea tasted more bitter than it ever had before. I didn't know then that it was the first crack, in the teacup and in me. On the first morning of January, I woke to find my things gone. Not everything, just little pieces, one by one, as if someone were quietly erasing my presence from the house. The blue ceramic vase I'd bought at the farmer's market, the photo of Jacob and me when he was 10, the floral curtains I'd sewn from leftover fabric, all vanished as if they had never existed. The living room looked completely different. The new white light from the ceiling made everything feel flat and cold. Family photos had been replaced by abstract paintings, expensive, soulless blocks of color that meant nothing to me. I stood there, feeling like I'd stepped into a stranger's home. Vanessa sat on the sofa, a latte cup in hand, her hair tied up, the morning light casting a soft glow across her face. She looked like she'd stepped out of a home design magazine. When she saw me, she smiled. "I just wanted to make the house brighter, Mom." I stood in the kitchen doorway, flour still on my hands from last night's bread dough. "What happened to the old wooden table?" "Oh, that?" she said breezily. "I gave it away. It was too heavy, too dark. Now look, so much lighter, right?" I followed her gesture. Where the table had once stood was now an empty space, replaced by a slick glass surface, cold as a frozen lake. I nodded, tried to smile, but something caught in my throat. Vanessa rose from her chair, lifted her cup, and moved around the room with quiet ease. "I think we should change the curtains, too," she said. "Don't you think these ones look a little old? Beige would go better with white walls." She said "we," but her tone carried no hint of inclusion, only decision. I watched her glide across the room, graceful, careful, efficient. And suddenly I understood. Control doesn't need to raise its voice. It just needs to wear a pleasant smile. Jacob sat nearby, pretending to read the newspaper. When I looked at him, he averted his eyes. "Jacob," I asked softly, "are you okay with this?" He folded the paper and gave a small, uneasy smile. "She's just trying to help, Mom." That simple sentence, I'd heard it from men all my life. The excuse for silence. In his eyes, I saw a quiet tug of war, half wanting to speak, half terrified of losing the fragile peace he had. I sat down, my hands resting on my knees, keeping my tone calm. "I don't mind changes," I said. "I'd just like to know first so I don't think I'm imagining things." Vanessa turned to me. A flicker of something, surprise, irritation, crossed her face before she quickly softened it into a smile. "Of course, Mom. I just thought you'd like the freshness." I nodded, glancing out the window. Snow was falling, soft, steady, blanketing the pines in the distance. Inside me, I heard a faint sound, not the wind, but something cracking. I thought of the cracked porcelain cup still sitting on the shelf. In my mind, the fracture seemed to have grown longer. The house I had built with breath and belief now gleamed bright and spotless, a beautiful museum where everything was perfectly arranged, except the hearts of the people living inside it. That night, the scent of roasted meat and sauce drifted through the house. From the living room came the blare of the TV, actors laughing, commercial jingles, then another sound, real laughter, theirs. Jacob and Vanessa sat close together on the new sofa, plates balanced on the coffee table, the flicker of the screen lighting their faces. And I ate alone in the kitchen. The kitchen I once loved for its warmth now glowed sterile white, like a lab. I sat at the edge of the table, my soup growing cold, listening to the soft clink of my spoon against the bowl, a small, lonely rhythm beneath the laughter echoing through the wall. I chewed slowly, not because I was hungry, but to stretch out the feeling that I still existed here. Each time they laughed, I nodded softly, as if I understood their jokes, though I couldn't really hear them. Maybe I was just clinging to the illusion of a family. On the table, The cracked porcelain teacup still sat where I'd left it. I hadn't bothered to refill it with hot water. The crack had turned a faint gray now, and when I touched it, the porcelain felt icy cold. I traced the rim gently, and from the living room came Vanessa's laughter, louder this time. That laugh drifted through the walls, brushing against me like a draft slipping through a doorframe. It wasn't meant to hurt, but it did. It reminded me that I no longer belonged here. I looked around the kitchen. Everything was in a different place. The old clock that once hung by the fridge was now packed in a cardboard box on the porch because Vanessa preferred minimalism. The embroidered hand towel with the letter M had vanished. Even the sugar jar had been replaced by a glass container with a shiny new label. I sat there, trying to recall the sounds that once filled this house. Jacob's small footsteps running down the hallway, the gentle pour of warm water into my teacup, my own humming as I cleaned up each night. Now, those sounds were gone, replaced by the TV's chatter and laughter that didn't belong to me. Outside the window, snow was falling heavily, blanketing the yard, covering even the tulips I had planted last spring. The porch light flickered dimly, and in the reflection of the glass, I saw myself, small, blurred, sitting in a kitchen far too bright for comfort. And in that reflection, I finally saw what I hadn't wanted to admit. I was being erased, not through cruelty or confrontation, but through the slow replacement of everything that once carried my shape. I turned the teacup in my hands. The steam had long since faded. The cold seeped through the porcelain, through my skin, and straight into my chest. I set the cup down quietly. From beyond the wall came another burst of laughter, sharp, carefree, unbothered, and on my side there was only the soft ticking of the clock, steady, patient, as the winter inside me settled in, cold and complete. That morning, the snow had finally stopped. A thin light slipped through the white curtains, sweeping across the cold kitchen floor. I was just about to make tea when the phone began to vibrate. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. I hesitated a few seconds before answering. A man's voice, low, deliberate, came through. "Mrs. Marion Reed? I'm calling from Houston. I'm very sorry to inform you. Your brother, Mr. Arthur Reed, has passed away." I froze. I don't remember what I said, only that I sank into the nearest chair. His voice kept talking, calm and distant, as if coming from the far side of a dream. The funeral, the will, some paperwork, but the only words that truly reached me were, "Arthur is gone." Arthur, my brother who once carried me across a river, who gave me his oversized coat that first winter in Portland. We hadn't seen each other in years, not since he'd moved to Texas, married, and drifted away. Our lives had split like two rivers flowing in opposite directions. I still sent Christmas cards every year, but he never replied. I thought I'd grown used to the silence, until this morning. "Was he in pain?" I asked softly. The man paused. "He passed peacefully, ma'am. And he mentioned you in his will." I said nothing. Something rose in my throat. Not quite tears, but a tight ache of gratitude. "I'll be mailing the official documents," he continued. "Mr. Arthur has left you his entire estate, approximately $380,000. I went still. $380,000. That was everything he owned. But the numbers didn't make me think of money. They made me think of him, an old man in the South, living alone, yet still remembering his little sister after all those years. The thought warmed me and hurt me at the same time, like holding a cup of hot tea in cold hands. After the call ended, I sat there for a long while. The clock ticked, each second slow, distinct. I remembered the last time I saw Arthur, nearly 30 years ago, at our mother's funeral. He'd placed his hand on my shoulder and whispered, There'll come a time when you'll have to stand alone, Marian. But don't ever let anyone teach you how to stand. I hadn't understood what he meant back then. Now I did. Some lessons only reveal themselves once the person who taught them is gone. I walked to the window and looked out over the snow-covered yard. The pale sunlight shimmered faintly against the frozen pines. A small sparrow landed on the sill, shook its feathers, and flew away. Everything remained still, as if the world didn't realize it had just lost someone. I placed the kettle on the stove and waited for it to boil. My hand trembled as I picked up the cracked porcelain cup. Steam rose, briefly hiding the fracture, then cleared, leaving it bare again. Quietly, I whispered, "I heard you, Arthur." And in that moment, the kitchen felt warmer, not because of the tea, but because of memory. I cried then, not the loud kind of crying that fills a funeral, but the quiet tears that fall unnoticed, hotter than the tea itself. I cried out of sorrow and out of something deeper, the feeling of being seen for the first time in years. Arthur was the last person in the family who remembered me not just as Jacob's mother, but as myself, as Marian Reed, a woman who had once dreamed, once failed, and once learned to stand again. In that moment, I felt touched by someone's hand, even if that someone no longer existed in this world. I wiped my tears and tried to steady my voice as I said, "Thank you," to the lawyer. When the call ended, the house fell back into silence. The wind outside brushed along the porch, pulling me back into the present. I was about to make another cup of tea when Vanessa walked in, just as I set the phone down. She was dressed neatly, her hair tied high, a trace of new perfume following her. In her hand was an open magazine, its glossy pages shouting headlines about smart real estate investments. She stopped at the kitchen doorway, smiled lightly. "How wonderful for you," she said. "At your age, having a little security must feel nice." I looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" She pointed at the phone on the table. "I overheard you talking. About the money. From Mr. Arthur, wasn't it?" Her tone wasn't loud, but every word landed carefully, precisely. I nodded, slowly. "Yes, my brother passed away. It was unexpected. He left a little something behind." Vanessa tilted her head, lips curving faintly. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said. Then, after a pause, "But a little? I heard it was quite a lot." I hesitated. "Around 380,000. She gave a low whistle. "Wow, that's something." Sitting down, she crossed her legs, looking perfectly at ease, like we were talking about the weather. "Well, that's great, Mom. At least now you can relax. It's always good to have a safety net at this stage in life." I smiled weakly, missing the shift beneath her tone. My thoughts were still in Houston, with Arthur, somewhere between memory and loss. "Let me make you some tea," she offered, though she didn't wait for me to agree. As she poured the hot water, I saw the reflection of light flicker in her eyes. Not the soft light of sympathy, but something sharper, clear, metallic, deliberate. She set the cup in front of me, her other hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "Try not to be too sad," she said sweetly. "I'm sure he wanted you to be comfortable. You've worked hard long enough." Her voice was smooth, tender even, but something in it made my chest tighten. I nodded, thanked her, and looked down at my tea. Steam rose, veiling her face for a brief moment, but only for a second. When it cleared, her smile was still there, perfect, unwavering. She sipped her tea, eyes glancing toward the phone. I'm just curious, she said casually.
Have you thought about what you'll do with the money?
Maybe invest it? With the interest rates these days, it'd be a shame to let it just sit there. I haven't thought about it, I answered quietly. Of course, but Jacob could help. He knows law and finance, you know. She said it softly, almost kindly, before standing up to adjust one of the abstract paintings on the wall. The overhead light caught the edge of her fur collar, flashing for a moment like cold metal. I watched her walk away, the sound of her heels fading down the hall. The house grew quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This was the silence that comes right before the snow begins to fall heavier. I turned back to my tea, pressing a fingertip to the rim of the cup. The warmth was gone. The crack had deepened, finer, darker, as if warning me that this winter was only just beginning. In the days following the call from Houston, Vanessa became the perfect daughter-in-law again. Every morning she rose before me to brew coffee, the scent of vanilla and cinnamon filling the kitchen. "Mom, I made it a little stronger this time, just how you like it," she'd say, her tone gentle and warm. By noon, when I came back from the market, the dining table was already set, a steaming bowl of chicken soup waiting. It was Jacob's childhood favorite, one I used to make for him after long school days. Now Vanessa made it instead, following my old recipe to the letter. Yet the taste was different, richer, flawless, and missing something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was honesty. She talked more these days, sweet, easy, always flattering. "Mom, that color makes you look years younger." "You have such a classic sense of style. I've started loving vintage decor because of you. I tell my friends about you all the time." Those words dripped like honey, but they drained me more than any silence ever had. I tried to convince myself she was changing, learning to be closer, softer. But trust, once cracked, never fully heals. One morning, as I was trimming flowers on the porch, Vanessa stepped out, laptop in hand. The sunlight hit her face and her eyes gleamed, bright, focused, like someone ready to make a deal. "Mom," she began, "let me help you manage the inheritance. Jacob understands all the legal stuff." I looked up. "Help me?" "Yes," she said smoothly. "I just mean, maybe Jacob could co-sign on the account. You know, in case you forget something or get tricked by those bank people. It's a mess these days, you know." Her tone was calm, every word polished, sliding effortlessly like oil over stone. I looked down at the rose pot beside me. The buds had just reopened after the month's first snowstorm. I touched one petal. It fell, red and vivid against the white ground. "I still remember how to take care of my own money," I said quietly, steady in my voice. Vanessa smiled, closing her laptop, and crouched beside me. "I know you're smart, Mom, but letting Jacob handle the paperwork would just be safer. He's worked with lawyers before." As she spoke, her hand landed lightly on my shoulder, not a suggestion, but a statement. I said nothing. The sunlight glinted along the gold edge of her collar. I walked back into the house, hearing her voice behind me, soft, measured. "I only want to help you, Mom. You know how much I love this family." Part of me wanted to believe her. I always wanted to believe my son had chosen the right woman. I'd taught Jacob that marriage was about building together, not competing. And once, I truly believed Vanessa was the missing piece that made him whole. As I passed the living room, I caught sight of the new sofa, the one that had replaced all my old memories. Light from the window spilled across the glass frame, catching my reflection. Faded, still, and tired in a way I couldn't hide. I sat down at the table and poured myself another cup of tea. Steam rose, tracing faint lines in the air, and from the yard came Vanessa's laughter, clear, carefree, untouched by weight or worry. I close my eyes. Perhaps trust is like that cracked porcelain cup. It can still hold warm water, but never for long. That afternoon, sunlight slanted through the kitchen window, spilling across the pale wooden table Vanessa had recently replaced. I set my teacup down and watched the steam rise slowly, curling like a thought that refused to fade. Then I said to her, almost more as a sharing than a decision, "I've been thinking. Maybe I should set aside a small portion of that money for Sophie's college fund. She'll grow up fast, and tuition these days is expensive." For just a moment, something flickered in Vanessa's eyes, so quick that most people wouldn't have noticed, like the glint of a knife just beneath the surface of water. She took a sip of her coffee, smiled, and spoke with such honeyed ease that I almost didn't hear the edge beneath it. "That's a lovely idea, Mom, but investing it would be so much better," she said, turning the silver ring on her finger. "If you invest, the profits alone could pay for Sophie's tuition later, without touching the principal. I have a friend in finance who manages a fund that's very safe, practically no risk." Her words flowed smooth as syrup, sweet, polished, and hard to swallow. I stayed quiet, listening to the ticking of the wall clock. In that bright kitchen, even the warmth of afternoon light couldn't seem to reach the corner where I sat. "What do you think, Jacob?" I asked, hoping to hear a voice that wasn't hers. Jacob looked up from the sofa, smiled faintly. "Vanessa knows more about this stuff than I do, Mom. If she says it's good, it probably is." I looked at my son, his face calm and distant, like fresh snow, white, flat, untouched. I nodded, said nothing more. Vanessa went on about interest rates, about opportunity, about how smart Americans let their money work for them. Each sentence sounded like advice, but the rhythm was that of a plan already made. I didn't understand all the terms she used, but I understood her eyes, too bright, too sharp, too calculating for something called family. When she finished, I rose and went to the counter to pour myself more tea. The sound of hot water striking porcelain was soft and steady, small, comforting, familiar. Steam swirled upward, veiling the crack on the cup for just a moment, then clearing again. I stared at it for a long time. That thin line would never disappear, no matter how many times it was filled, like something inside me that no sweetness could truly heal. Vanessa stepped closer, her voice barely above a breath. "I only want to help you feel secure, Mom. You do trust me, don't you?" I turned to her and smiled. "Of course I do." The words came out easier than I expected, but in the back of my mind, another voice whispered, distant, cautious. "Careful, Marion. Honey may be sweet, but it can trap a butterfly until its wings stop moving." Outside the window, the wind brushed through the yard, carrying a few late snowflakes across the fading light. The afternoon dimmed into a soft blur between the pine trees. I touched the teacup, felt the warmth rise through my fingers, then fade as quickly as it came. I set it down. The faint clink of porcelain against wood sounded small, but sharp enough to feel like a warning. That night, the clock struck 2. The house lay swallowed in darkness, lit only by a thin strip of yellow light spilling from the hallway lamp onto the wooden floor. I couldn't sleep. Outside, the wind hissed through the cracks in the window frame, breathing like someone sighing just beyond the glass. I wrapped my robe around me and stepped out of the bedroom. Halfway down the hall, a faint glow flickered from the kitchen. I hesitated, ready to turn back, until I heard Vanessa's voice. She was speaking softly, but in the stillness of that hour, every word carried clear and sharp. "All she has to do is sign, and the house will be ours." My heart stopped. I froze where I stood, the chill from the floor crawling up my bare feet. Each word fell like the prick of a needle against skin. I couldn't see Jacob, but I heard him shift, restless, uncertain. Vanessa's voice came again, gentle, steady, certain. Jacob's doing great. He's got her trust. That's the hardest part. Just a little more time. I forgot to breathe. The kitchen, the same one that once smelled of cinnamon and laughter, had become a battlefield for whispers. I pressed my back against the wall, my pulse hammering. Then Jacob spoke, his voice trembling between guilt and fear. "I don't want to do this anymore, Vanessa. She's my mother." "And she's our future," Vanessa answered, her tone soft enough to cut. "She's had her life, Jacob. It's our turn now." I heard the faint clink of ceramic, maybe a teacup being set down. The wind outside howled louder, rattling the window panes like a warning. My hands clutched the wall, the room spun. So this was it. The truth behind all those tender mornings, the perfect coffee, the sweet, "Rest, Mom, you've done enough," sugarcoating over poison. I tried to inhale, but my lungs felt locked. Part of me wanted to rush in, to scream, "I heard you!" But another part, the one that had learned to survive through silence, kept me still. I stepped back, and my heel brushed the wall. The floorboards creaked. I froze. "Did you hear that?" Jacob asked. "No," Vanessa replied quickly, her tone dismissive. "Probably the wind." I pressed myself against the wall, eyes shut, the pounding in my ears drowning everything else. The wind roared louder, as if the house itself wanted to speak. And in that noise, I saw everything clearly. The home I'd built with 40 years of labor about to be sold with a single signature, my own. My breath shook. I knew that if I stepped into that kitchen, they would deny it all. They'd say I imagined it, that I misheard, that age was confusing me. So I stayed where I was. From the kitchen came a low, knowing laugh. "Don't worry, Jacob," Vanessa purred. "Your mom trusts you more than anyone. When she signs, you'll still be the hero. Win-win, right?" Jacob said nothing, and that silence hurt more than any words could. I turned away, walking slowly back to my room, my legs trembling as though each step crushed a memory I'd built with my own hands. The door closed behind me, and darkness swallowed the rest. I sat at the edge of the bed, clutching the wool blanket, my heart beat so fast I could hear it echoing inside my chest. Outside the wind moaned, and snow began to fall again, slow, steady, bone cold. That night, I knew I'd heard something I could never unhear, and it was also the night I began to change. I held my breath in the dark hallway. Every sound seemed to stretch endlessly. The wind whistling through the cracks in the door, the faint clink of a spoon against a cup in the kitchen, and Vanessa's voice, soft as velvet, yet sharp as a blade. Each word pierced my chest like a needle driven deep. I pressed my back to the wall, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The house, once my shelter, had become a cold labyrinth where even whispers could kill more slowly than poison. "All you have to do is make her believe it's just for a tax reduction," Vanessa said, calm and deliberate. "After that, everything will be perfectly legal."
"Keep your voice down," Jacob murmured, his tone trembling. Vanessa let out a quiet laugh. "Relax, she's asleep." I closed my eyes, tried to take a breath, but my lungs locked, gripped by a fear both old and new. The kind of fear that comes when you realize your own son now stands on the other side. I stepped back and bumped into the small table by the wall. The teacup in my hand slipped and fell. The sound was sharp, fragile porcelain shattering through the still night. Hot tea splashed across my hand, stinging. Shards scattered across the floor, and the faint kitchen light spilled through the crack in the door, glinting off the spilled liquid, dark red, where my blood had mixed with tea. The sound in the kitchen stopped.
"Did you hear that?"
Jacob asked, his voice lower now. Footsteps. Vanessa moved closer, her heels tapping softly, calmly. "Probably the cat," she said, her voice disturbingly casual. I crouched down, hands shaking, and began gathering the broken pieces. Each time I touched one, the cut in my palm burned deeper. But the pain didn't feel real, only the cold spreading from my fingertips to my chest. On the floor, the spilled tea formed crooked lines, a map of something broken and unknown. I stared at it, messy, fractured, but honest. At least it told the truth, more than any word spoken in this house. I backed into my room and closed the door quietly. In the mirror, my face was pale, my hair disheveled, my eyes hollow. But deep within them, something had awakened, not anger, but clarity. I walked to the window and lifted the curtain slightly. Snow was falling thick outside, reflecting the silver of the moon. The garden lay still, holding its breath with me. I pressed my bleeding hand against the cold glass. The chill met my skin like a reflection of myself, worn, tired, but still alive. In the darkness, I whispered, "Marion Reed, you've slept long enough. Get up." The words were quiet, but they were real, not comfort,
But command. I felt my heartbeat steady, stronger than before. Outside, the wind slammed against the porch, making the old wooden sign, "Reed Family," rattle violently. I looked at it and said softly, "Family, huh?" Then I smiled. A thin, cold smile, but the first real one in years. I wrapped my hand in bandages, wiped away the tea, and picked up each shard of porcelain, tucking them into the pocket of my robe. I didn't know why, only that I needed to keep them. They were proof of a night, of a wound, of the moment I finally opened my eyes. The wind still howled outside the porch, but this time I wasn't afraid. The next morning, I started pretending to forget things. Not the sweet, harmless kind of forgetfulness that comes with age, but the measured kind. Every pause, every tremble, every misplaced key was deliberate. When Vanessa finished making the morning coffee, I stood by the doorway, my voice just a little shaky. "Vanessa, dear, what day is it today?" She turned, her smile as flawless as something printed on a magazine cover. "Tuesday, Mom. Don't worry, I'll help you remember." I nodded, feigning gratitude. My memory's been so bad lately. Yesterday I went out to the garden and forgot why I went there. Vanessa rested her hand on my shoulder, her voice melting with practiced sweetness. "That's all right, Mom. It happens to everyone eventually. Just let Jacob and me take care of you." I smiled, let her believe she'd won. In the mirror's reflection, I caught my own image. Thinning silver hair, smaller frame, eyes that seemed dimmer. But behind that reflection stood someone else, the woman who had awakened the night before. All morning I played my role perfectly, asking the same question twice, misplacing my keys, even letting the kettle overflow when I made tea. Each time Vanessa would glance at Jacob, press her lips together, and sigh softly with that look of well-practiced pity. She didn't realize that her pity was the perfect disguise, the curtain behind which I could move freely. When they went out that afternoon, I opened my drawer and took out a dark leather notebook. On each page, I wrote down what I'd heard that night. She said, "All she has to do is sign," in a firm tone. My handwriting trembled slightly. The cut on my hand hadn't fully healed. Between the pages, I taped a shard of the broken teacup, a reminder that cracks don't just mark damage, they're also the places where light gets in. By dusk, Vanessa returned, bright and glowing, shopping bags in hand. "Mom, I bought you this new sweater," she said.
The neckline's wider, much easier to wear. I smiled, thanked her, and tucked away the detail in my notes, including how her tone lifted slightly when she mentioned the bank. That evening, I pretended to forget to turn off the kitchen light. Her voice floated from behind me, sweet but clipped at the edges. "Mom, you have to be more careful. What if there was a fire?" I turned, smiled faintly. "Thank you for reminding me, dear. I'm lucky to have you." That night, after they'd gone to bed, I stepped out onto the porch. The wind carried the sharp scent of pine and cold. I sat on the wooden chair, opened my notebook, read the words I'd written, and whispered, "Act 1, complete." I knew then that to expose deceit, you sometimes have to let it reveal itself under the right light. The next morning, I stood before the mirror, rehearsing the fragile voice of a forgetful woman. Then I tucked my phone into the pocket of my apron, hit the record button, and hid it beneath the fabric. From now on, every word spoken in this house would be heard and remembered. At lunch, Vanessa looked at me with concern, just a little too polished. "Mom, are you sure you've taken your medicine? You seem tired." I smiled vaguely. "Maybe I forgot." "That's okay," she said, glancing at Jacob. "I'll help you keep track." Her voice was soft, but the recorder captured every syllable, every pause, every syrupy note, every smile that didn't reach her eyes. I turned back to the sink, letting the steam hide the small curve at the corner of my mouth. That afternoon, I called Linda, my oldest friend, the one who'd seen me through nearly half my life. When I heard her voice, my throat closed up. "Linda," I whispered, "I need help, but it has to stay quiet." She didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in an hour." Snow had begun to fall again when she arrived. Her old silver car stopped by the gate and she stepped out, bundled in a dark blue wool hat. When she saw me, she didn't ask a single question, just placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. The 2 a.m. whispers, the plan to fake my signature, the tea, the blood, the silence. Linda didn't look surprised. Maybe years of social work had made her immune to shock, but her eyes, steady, firm, told me I wasn't alone anymore. "We'll need evidence," she said, reaching into her large canvas bag. She pulled out a small camera, no bigger than a matchbox. "This one's easy to hide," she said. "I brought it from the office before I retired." I looked around the house, searching for the safest place. My eyes landed on the old photo of Jacob and me at Crater Lake. A dark wooden frame, dust settling in its corners, hanging on the living room wall for years. "Here," Linda said quietly. "They won't notice. People rarely look long at the past." We worked in silence. She lifted the frame, slipped the small camera into the corner, and threaded the charging wire through the back. Then she hung it up again, adjusting it until everything looked untouched. It took barely 10 minutes, yet it felt like a ritual. When we finished, Linda turned to me, smiling, tired but proud. "You did well, Marion. Now just let it run. We'll see exactly what they're planning." I made tea for both of us, steam curled up between us, catching the soft glow of the kitchen light. We sat across from each other in the house that now carried a secret heartbeat. "Linda," I said quietly, "I'm scared." "Of course you are," she replied. "But being scared doesn't mean you're weak." She reached over and took my hand, her grip firm and steady. "Don't worry," she said, her eyes locking on mine. "They think you're weak, but the truth is, when we're at our weakest, that's when women are strongest." Her words stayed with me long after she left. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the road in silent white. I stood before the photo we'd just rehung, and for a moment, it felt as though the young woman inside that old picture, the one with bright eyes and wind-blown hair,
was watching me from the other side. Quiet, but ready to fight. I whispered, "Act 2, let's begin." And for the first time in months, I smiled. A smile with purpose. It took me nearly a week to wait for the right moment. Everything had to feel natural. No suspicion, no sudden moves. One morning, while Vanessa was watering the garden, I walked up behind her, my voice slow and weary, like someone half awake from a confused dream. "You were right," I began softly. "I've been thinking. If transferring the house to Jacob's name helps with the taxes, then maybe I should. Those papers are so complicated. I don't really understand them anyway." Vanessa turned, and her smile bloomed instantly, soft as silk, but with that telltale glint of metal beneath the sunlight. "Really? You're sure, Mom?" I nodded, gazing absently toward the pond behind the house. "Yes, it'll be Jacob's one day anyway. Might as well make things easier now." "Oh, Mom, you don't know how happy that makes me," she said, her voice trembling with excitement she was trying, poorly, to hide. "I'll call my cousin, Benjamin. He's a lawyer. He can handle everything. You won't have to lift a finger." I smiled faintly. "A lawyer? I don't think I've met him." "Benjamin's wonderful," she said quickly. "Very professional. He won't even charge us. Family discount." I nodded again, feigning relief, though a cold current ran down my spine. I knew it. The moment a liar starts talking too much, it means they're dressing the knife with ribbon. That afternoon, she called him over. I heard the car stop outside, then 3 firm knocks on the door. The man who entered wore a black coat, carried a leather briefcase, and smelled of strong cologne and confidence. "Mrs. Reed," he said smoothly. "I'm Benjamin Clark. It's a pleasure to help." His voice had the polish of someone who'd lied enough times to no longer notice. I invited them to sit and poured tea. Vanessa sat beside Jacob, their fingers intertwined, smiling easily like a pair of hosts in a show. I sat at the head of the table, my posture small, my movements slow, the perfect image of a frail old woman trying to keep up with the young. Benjamin opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "This is just administrative, Mrs. Reed," he said. "You'll retain full residency rights, but the title will legally move to Jacob. It'll save your family a considerable amount on taxes." Vanessa chimed in. "See, Mom, just like I said, it's only paperwork." I nodded, so gently that even they believed I was tired. But beneath the floral apron, my phone was already recording, as it always did. I filled the kettle, letting the hiss of steam rise and cloud the air. While they chatted, I carried the porcelain teapot to the table, the one Vanessa once called such a charming antique. As I removed the lid, I glanced inside. Hidden beneath the tea strainer was the small camera Linda had given me a week earlier. I set the pot down in the center of the table, tilting it just slightly so the lens faced them directly. "Peppermint tea," I said calmly. "It helps people sleep better and speak a little more honestly." Vanessa laughed, taking the cup I poured. "Mom, you really do know the perfect timing." Benjamin glanced at his watch, then began his well-rehearsed speech, his tone brisk, professional. "If you'll sign here, we can file everything by tomorrow. The process should be finished within a few weeks." I looked at the papers. Tiny words, dense lines, a foreign language of ownership and betrayal. My heartbeat drummed in my chest. In my pocket, I felt the cracked shard of porcelain I always carried, a small reminder not to tremble. Vanessa tilted her head, her voice soft, coaxing. "Mom, it's just a signature. I promise everything will be fine. You trust me, don't you?" I met her gaze and smiled slowly. "Of course, Vanessa. I always trust you." And as the words left my mouth, I pressed the hidden button beneath the teapot, and the camera came to life. Steam rose between us, soft and blurring their faces, but this time I knew exactly who was really being seen. My heart pounded, each beat like a hammer striking the walls of my chest, echoing against Benjamin's smooth voice as he spoke about inheritance rights and legal clauses. I steadied my hands, forcing them not to tremble as I set my cup down. The steam drifted upward, veiling half my face, but it couldn't hide the storm tightening inside me. If they discovered the truth, I'd lose everything. Not just the plan, not just my dignity, but the home I had spent 40 years of my life building. I glanced at Vanessa. She smiled, nodded along, her fingertips tapping lightly on the table in rhythm with Benjamin's words. Confident, relaxed, completely unaware. I took a slow sip of tea, pretending to be confused. These words, I don't understand them, I murmured. It's all so technical. Benjamin smiled, polished and practiced. That's perfectly fine, Mrs. Reed. That's what we're here for. Vanessa leaned closer, her voice dripping honey. Just sign, Mom. You'll thank me later. I nodded, taking the pen they handed me. My hand shook, not from fear, but from knowing this performance had to be flawless. One wrong note and the whole act would collapse. I lowered my head, pretending to read each line carefully, buying time. Every second precious, each one feeding the camera's quiet hunger beneath the teapot lid. Sunlight streamed through the window, glinting across the porcelain's glossy surface. The ticking clock filled the silence, each second stretching long, deliberate, endless. Every sound sharpened in my ears. The rustle of papers, the clink of a spoon, Vanessa's low laugh. They never noticed. They were too busy planning victory. Vanessa leaned toward Jacob, showing him where to sign. Benjamin nodded along, voice calm and precise, throwing around words like authorization, transfer of ownership, legal execution. Each one landed cold and heavy. I looked at my son. Jacob sat beside his wife, face drawn tight, eyes fixed on the paper. He wouldn't meet mine. Perhaps he was convincing himself that this was all for the best, that betrayal wrapped in practicality was somehow justified. I wanted to reach for his hand, but I didn't. Some silences are the only dignity we have left. Vanessa signed next, setting the pen down with a satisfied sigh. There, easy, right? I smiled, soft, still, the kind of smile that winter lakes wear under ice. Benjamin gathered the documents, slipping them neatly into his case. I'll have this finalized by the end of the week. Congratulations, Reed family. They lifted their teacups, the porcelain chiming together in a crisp little toast. I stayed seated, one hand resting lightly on the warm teapot. In the hush that followed, I could hear it clearly. The rhythm of deception and the quiet pulse of my camera catching every word, every smile, every lie. Vanessa rose, walking to the mirror on the wall to fix her hair. The afternoon light bounced across her reflection, her face glowing with pride, the triumphant look of someone certain she'd won. But what I saw in that same mirror wasn't her. It was me, an old face, lined and pale, eyes dark but steady. Not afraid, just waiting. I brushed a finger over the small scar on my hand, the one left by the shard of porcelain that had cut me that night. It had healed, but it still stung when I remembered. That sting kept me awake. Thank you, Vanessa, I said evenly. Thank you for helping me feel at peace. She turned, smiling wide, never realizing what those words truly meant. When they left the room, I closed the door softly behind them, poured another cup of tea, and sat down. The recorder kept running, its tiny red light pulsing under the porcelain like a steady heartbeat. Outside, wind swept through the pines, carrying flakes of snow that shimmered midair before vanishing. I looked out the window, the same small smile still on my lips. Calm, cold, certain. The play had reached its best act yet, and this time, I was the one holding the script.
3 days after that fake signing, I sat by the window, watching snow drift lightly over the porch. I told Jacob and Vanessa I was going to Florida to visit an old friend.
Linda invited me for a few weeks, I said, sounding tired. The air's warmer there, easier to breathe. Vanessa touched my shoulder, smiling softly. You should go, Mom. A change of scenery will do you good. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything here. I nodded, packed a few clothes, my old leather journal, and slipped the cracked teacup into my bag. But I didn't go to Florida. Instead, I took a taxi to a small hotel in downtown Portland, barely half an hour from home. Linda was waiting in the lobby. She hugged me and whispered, "Let them believe you're gone. Now we watch them perform." We went up to a modest room on the 6th floor, its window overlooking the Burnside Bridge. On the table sat her laptop, already connected. When she opened the screen, its blue glow lit both our faces. Tired, tense, but utterly awake. The connection was steady, and then my living room appeared. Everything looked the same, except for one detail. I wasn't there anymore. Through the camera hidden in the picture frame, we watched Vanessa move across the room. She said something to Jacob, her tone brisk, controlled. Jacob only nodded, avoiding her gaze. Then they started clearing out my belongings, my old winter coat, the rest of my teacup set, family photos unframed and stacked. Vanessa gestured for Jacob to carry the boxes to the basement. A man I didn't know appeared at the door. They spoke briefly, and he began hauling the boxes away. I tightened my grip on my coffee cup. They didn't waste much time, I said quietly. Linda nodded beside me. Keep watching. Everything you see today becomes evidence tomorrow. Vanessa went further still. She opened the kitchen cabinets, pulled out bottles of wine, and arranged them neatly on the counter to make the space more inviting. She laughed at something Jacob said.
He didn't laugh back. I wanted to scream into the screen, "Jacob, what are you doing?" But I just exhaled. Some people aren't cruel. They're simply weak. And weakness, I've learned, can destroy more than malice ever could. An hour later, Vanessa brought in an appraiser, a woman in a black coat, clipboard in hand. She paced the room, measuring walls, snapping photos. "This is a beautiful home," she said. Vanessa's face lit up like crystal under sunlight. "She won't be coming back," she replied casually. The words dropped soft, but to me, each one sliced deep. Linda inhaled sharply beside me. "I've seen a lot, Marion," she murmured, "but that's ice cold." I nodded, eyes fixed on the screen. Vanessa kept smiling, pointing out the kitchen, the ceiling, the windows, as if she hadn't already erased me from them. When she signed the appraisal form, it felt as though someone had just written the final line of the 40-year story I'd built, brick by brick. But then I realized, no, it wasn't a period. It was only a comma, a pause in a sentence I would finish myself. "Let's keep rolling," I whispered. Linda placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "We'll let them bury themselves." Outside, the snow thickened. Each flake fell slower, heavier, like time holding its breath. 3 days later, as Vanessa began meeting with a real estate broker, Oliver, the private investigator Linda knew, arrived at our hotel. He was a man in his 50s, short, steady, with steel-rimmed glasses, and a voice that always stayed one notch quieter than necessary, as though he lived among secrets.
This is Oliver, Linda said. He used to work in financial crimes. You can trust him. Oliver set a small USB drive on the table. I think you'll want to see this, he said. I watched the screen as Linda plugged the USB into her laptop. The video appeared, my living room again. Vanessa sat at the table, pen in hand. Beside her was Benjamin, the lawyer cousin, and there, in front of them, was a document bearing my forged signature. Oliver's voice was calm, low, unwavering. They're planning to file it with the tax office this week. I've mirrored all their data. It's admissible in court. On screen, Benjamin chuckled as Vanessa signed. The R in read is a little off, he said, but she'll never notice. Vanessa smiled faintly, her tone effortless. She can't even recognize herself anymore. I didn't look away. I made myself watch. My hands tightened around the edge of the table, but my eyes stayed dry, until Linda's hand came to rest gently on my shoulder. That's when I realized I was crying. But this time, the tears were different. Not from despair, not from pain. From release. Because now, the truth wasn't trapped in my head like a fever dream. It had shape. It had sound. It had proof. And it had a future. Linda poured me a cup of tea. Steam rose between us, blurring the yellow light of the lamp. You did the right thing, she said softly. They'll destroy themselves with their own greed. I wiped my tears, a tired smile tugging at my lips. It took me years to learn how to stand still and just watch. No, Linda said. You haven't been standing still. You've just been waiting for the wind to turn. Her words lingered in the air. I turned toward the window. Outside, Portland was slick with rain, the streets glowing orange and red from passing cars. In the reflection on the glass, I saw myself, an older woman with loose hair and a calm face, but eyes no longer lost. I knew then, when I returned, I wouldn't be the mother they thought they knew, no longer the trusting woman, easily soothed, hiding tears behind polite smiles. I was no longer the victim in that house. I was the storm they created. And when a storm rises, nothing keeps its shape. I closed the laptop, shut my journal, and slipped the cracked teacup into my bag. Its faint warmth spread across my palm, small but real. Outside, rain drummed against the window pane, each drop like a drumbeat marking the path home. Linda asked quietly, "When will you go back?" "When the snow falls again," I said. She frowned slightly. "Why then?" "So they can feel the cold," I answered. "The same cold they gave me." Linda nodded, her eyes a mix of worry and admiration. "Then I'll wait with you," she said, raising her cup. We toasted gently, two women long past believing in miracles, but still believing in justice. That night I slept deeply for the first time in years. In my dream, I opened the door to my old house. Snow blanketed the porch, soft and bright. No Vanessa, no sugar-coated words, only the wind and me, calm, upright, walking back into the place that once frightened me. By morning, I woke with one clear thought. It's time to go home. October 25th. Nothing about that date was special, except that the snow came earlier than usual, and my heartbeat moved slower than it should. I was coming back. The road leading up to the house was buried under a thick white sheet, the old tire tracks nearly erased by the wind. I turned off the engine and sat still for a moment, watching the snow rest on the roof I used to sweep clean every winter. The gray paint had started to peel, but the string lights were still there. Vanessa must have kept them, just enough to make things look homey. I opened the car door. Cold air hit my face. Snow crunched softly under my boots. Everything was so quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a house holding its breath. I stepped onto the porch, boots sinking slightly into the snow, and switched on the recorder hidden inside my coat pocket. A small click echoed, clean, sharp, like the gesture of someone who'd been ready for this moment all along. Inside, I heard footsteps and voices, laughter, easy and careless. I knocked 3 times, short, clear, even. The door opened. Warm yellow light spilled from the living room, framing Vanessa's face. She was still beautiful, neat in her cream-colored sweater, her hair pulled up, her lipstick perfectly measured. But her eyes, those eyes people once mistook for warmth, were now just 2 cold pieces of glass. "Back so soon, Mom?" She tilted her head, voice sweet as ever. "Too bad. You caught us right after we changed the locks." I looked at her without speaking, watching my breath turn to smoke in the air, thin and slow. Vanessa leaned one arm against the doorframe, blocking the way. "You really should have called first," she said lightly. "We didn't know you planned on coming back this early." "I missed home," I said quietly. She shrugged, her smile flickering for a second like a practiced line. "Home? You mean this house?" A gust of wind swept across the porch, lifting a few strands of my hair. I noticed the snow melting on the steps, dripping 1 drop at a time onto the cement, each sound sharp, steady, like a clock counting down. Vanessa stayed where she was, hand on her hip, smile unchanged. "Really, you don't have to worry," she said evenly. "All the paperwork's done. The house is under Jacob's name now. Everything's perfectly legal." I looked past her shoulder and saw Jacob standing in the living room, in a pressed shirt, hands in his pockets, hesitant, not daring to come closer. "I know," I said, my voice light, like snow falling. Vanessa blinked. "You know?" "Yes," I said softly. "I know everything." She laughed, a note too high, too bright. "Mom, don't misunderstand. We're just trying to take care of you. You're getting older. No need to stress about paperwork." I tilted my head slightly. "Do you know what's most terrifying for old people, Vanessa?" She narrowed her eyes. "What's that?" "It's being treated as if they're already dead, while they're still breathing." For half a second, she froze. Then she laughed again, higher this time. "Oh, Mom, you always know how to joke." I didn't answer. My hand stayed inside my pocket, fingertips resting on the phone, quietly recording every sound. The melting snow, her laughter, and the long breath I let out. I met her eyes. "Let me in," I said evenly. "I left a few things inside." "No, Mom," she said quickly, her tone firm beneath the sweetness. "We're reorganizing everything. Just tell me what you need. I'll find it for you." The cold wind sliced through the space between us. I could hear the slow rhythm of ice melting on the roof, each drop falling to the ground, steady, patient, like a second heartbeat outside my chest. I didn't say another word. I just stepped back and looked up at the wooden sign above the porch. Reed family. Snow had covered almost all of it, leaving only the word Reed faintly visible. I brushed it clean with my hand, leaving a print on the frozen wood. "Well then," I said quietly, "let's call today a family meeting." Vanessa still stood in the doorway, one arm folded, the other gripping the frame. Snow settled on her hair, tiny white flecks catching on the shoulders of her cream sweater. I looked at her for a long moment before speaking again, my voice so calm it startled even me. "I know." She frowned. "You know what?" "Enough," I said. "Enough to have a proper conversation." I gestured toward the yard. "Outside. We need to talk." She studied me, her eyes narrowing. "Out here? In this weather? You're joking!" "No," I said evenly.
Some things should only be said in the cold. People lie less when their lips start to shake. Vanessa rolled her eyes, then turned to Jacob, who lingered inside the doorway. "Come on out, Jacob. Your mother wants to talk." He hesitated, then stepped outside. My son, whom I'd raised with these two calloused hands, now looked like a stranger in his expensive coat. We sat at the old wooden table covered in snow. Its legs sank into the frost but held firm, the way something inside me still did. I took the cracked teacup from my pocket and placed it in the middle of the table. Steam rose from it slowly, thin and pale, like smoke from an old wound. Vanessa crossed her arms, smirking. "So, you called us out here just for tea?" "I'm not drinking tea," I said. "I'm listening." "Listening?" I nodded, my hand still in my coat pocket, thumb resting on the phone screen. The mist from the cup spread between us, softening her face. "Vanessa," I said, "have you ever thought about how every word you say leaves a trace?" She laughed, dry, brittle, like gravel underfoot. "What are you even talking about?" I took out the phone and pressed play. Her own voice filled the air, sharp and clear enough to cut through the cold. "Once she signs, the house will be ours." The world went still. Neither of them spoke. Only the wind moved through the pines, and someone's breath quickened, maybe mine. Vanessa forced a short laugh. "Where did you get that? Someone faked my voice, didn't they?" I met her eyes. "Listen carefully." Then I pressed play again. Her voice returned, calm and deliberate. "Jacob's doing great, just a little more time. Put the sleeping pills in her coffee. I'll take care of the rest." Jacob shot up from his chair. "Vanessa, that's— Shut up!" she hissed, turning back to me, her face pale. "Mom, when did you start recording?" I didn't answer. I slid the teacup a little closer to her. Steam rose between us, and drops of melted snow fell from the tabletop one by one, slow, steady, like a clock marking the end. "You know," I said softly, "the thing about tea is, even when the water boils, it never loses its fragrance. Good people are the same. No matter how much they're burned, they don't turn to poison." Vanessa said nothing. Jacob sank back into his chair, his hands gripping his head. As for me, I just felt light. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just still. The snow around us seemed brighter. Steam drifted upward, rising into the cold air, blending with the silence of a truth finally spoken. I pushed the phone toward them. "These are the sounds the police will hear tomorrow morning." No one spoke. Only the snow answered, falling against the roof, slow, heavy, and real.
Jacob froze. Even the wind rushing through the pine trees couldn't fill the silence that followed after the recording stopped. My son sat motionless, fists clenched tight, eyes wide, like he'd just seen the ghost of himself. The voice from the phone still played, warped slightly by the cold but unmistakably clear. "Sign it, Jacob. One signature, and the house will be ours." Jacob trembled. His lips parted. "Vanessa, that's—" She cut him off sharply. "Don't say a word." I didn't move. The steam from my tea rose like a thin veil around the table. A dusting of snow covered the wood, and under the pale light the crystals clung to every word we spoke, cold, sharp, real. Vanessa turned to me with a strained smile. "Mom, you must have misheard. Technology these days, people can fake anyone's voice." I said nothing. I simply lowered my gaze and tapped to play the next clip. Her voice came again, clear enough to sting. "Put the sleeping pills in her coffee. I'll handle the rest." The yard went utterly still. Only the sound of snow falling softly onto the teacup remained. Jacob shot up, the chair behind him collapsing into the snow. Vanessa, what the hell did you just say? You put something in my mother's coffee? No, you heard it wrong. It was a joke. A joke? I asked quietly. My tone was low and steady. Do you usually joke about poisoning people? Vanessa's face drained of color. Mom, where did you even— In my house, I interrupted. In the kitchen where you said you'd take care of me. She stumbled back, slipping slightly on the snow, then straightened, eyes darting for a way out. Jacob stood rigid, pale as ash. The words she'd once whispered to him now cutting him open from the inside. I looked at my son, the boy who once believed silence was the same as peace. Jacob, I said softly, peace built on lies never lasts. You just heard it for yourself. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His breath turned to white mist in the cold, fading as quickly as his excuses.
Vanessa's breathing quickened. She turned on me, voice sharp. What is this, Mom? You trying to destroy this family? I gave a faint smile. Family? I don't recall needing sleeping pills to hold a family together. Then a gust of wind swept through, scattering snow from the roof. The steam from my tea thinned and vanished, revealing the crack along the cup's rim. The same crack I'd seen from the beginning, now clear as the line dividing truth from deceit. Jacob staggered back, a trembling hand to his forehead. God, Vanessa, how could you? You didn't hear the full thing, she cried. I only said that because I was scared. Your mom was overreacting. Enough, I said, my voice low but unshakable. Don't add more words. The truth doesn't need translation. Vanessa inhaled sharply, glancing around for help, but there was nothing, only the wind and the snow. I saw her shoulders fold in, the slightest tremor running through her. Whether from fear or cold I couldn't tell. The yard was silent again, the kind of silence that makes the world itself pause to listen. Slowly I picked up my phone and turned off the speaker. That, I said evenly, was only the first part. There's more. There's video. Vanessa swallowed hard. Video? I met her eyes. I told you, I don't sleep anymore. The cold pressed in around us. I could hear my heartbeat, calm and certain. Not from fear, but because, at last, the truth had finally spoken in the snow. Vanessa took another step back until her spine nearly touched the wooden wall. Her breath came out in pale clouds, her eyes darting between me and Jacob. Mom, where did you even— I didn't let her finish. I heard it in my kitchen, I said, calm but heavy, each word falling like a stone. The same kitchen where you said you'd take care of me. She fell silent. Only the wind spoke, threading through the pines and carrying the faint rustle of their needles. The last light of day slanted across the yard, cold, thin, fading. I heard everything, Vanessa, I continued. Every word, every plan, every drop of what you meant to pour into my coffee. No, she snapped, her voice rising, shrill and trembling. You've misunderstood. I only— Forged my signature, I cut in. Sold my house. Each question layered another sheet of ice between us. Jacob turned to her, his eyes red. Vanessa, say something. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. And in that moment I saw it, the breaking. Not just between them, but in the boy I'd once believed still knew right from wrong. The yard was so still, I could hear my heartbeat merging with the sound of falling snow. Then, faintly at first, came another sound, the distant wail of a siren. One long note, then two, then three. Jacob spun toward me, wide-eyed. Mom, did you call them? I didn't answer. Linda's words echoed in my head. Let the evidence speak. You just stand there. Vanessa's voice cracked as she shouted, You have no right! This is a family matter! I looked at her and gave a small, tired smile.
Family? You forged my papers, tried to drug me, emptied my house, and you call that family? The sirens grew louder, blue and red lights flickering beyond the line of pines. Jacob staggered back, lips trembling, but no words came out. Vanessa clutched her head, screaming, "You'll regret this! You'll—" "No," I said quietly. "I've already done enough regretting." A gust of wind swept across the yard, scattering snow into the air. A few flakes landed in the teacup between us, now gone cold. I looked down. The crack had deepened, the gray porcelain tinged faintly pink in the reflection of the flashing lights. I bowed my head, watching the last trace of steam fade into the air, slow, gentle, beautiful, like something finally leaving for good. In that haze, I thought of the mornings long ago, when I made tea for Jacob, when his laughter filled the kitchen, when the house was still a refuge, not a battlefield. Now, it was just me, a cracked cup, and the truth. The steam disappeared completely, like an old spirit lifting from the walls. I exhaled and felt light, not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped pretending everything was fine. When the police stepped through the gate, the snow crunched under their boots, sharp and deliberate. Vanessa turned away, her shoulders shaking. Jacob stood motionless, his eyes hollow. I stayed seated. And there, in the dead of winter, in the cold that bit through bone, I felt something warm at last. Not from the tea, but from the only thing left standing, the truth. The sirens still echoed through the valley as 2 patrol cars stopped at the gate. Red and blue lights swept across the snow, flashing against the windows, making the house look as if it were breathing. An officer approached, removing his gloves. His voice was firm, clipped, practiced. "Vanessa Reed, you are under arrest for forgery, fraud, and attempted poisoning. You have the right to remain silent." I stood a few feet away, holding the cracked teacup in both hands. The last trace of steam clung to the rim. Vanessa struggled, her hair coming loose, panic burning in her eyes. "You have no proof. This is a family matter. Somebody set me up." The officer clasped the cuffs around her wrists with quiet precision. "You can explain that in court, ma'am." Jacob was crying. He stood on the porch, shoulders shaking, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. "Mom." His voice was hoarse, broken. "You've ruined everything. We've lost everything." I turned to him, my son, the one I had loved with every ounce of myself. "No, Jacob, we lost it long ago. Today is just the day the truth decided to show itself." He lowered his head. Snow clung to his hair, melting fast on his warm skin. From beyond the pines, a black SUV pulled up. The door opened, and Oliver stepped out. Gray coat, hands in his pockets. That calm look of a man who'd watched too many people crumble under their own greed. He walked toward the officers, nodded once at me, and handed them a small silver USB. 100 hours of footage, he said. Enough to bury them for good. The officer nodded, pocketed the drive, and turned away. Vanessa screamed when she saw it, her voice raw. "Mom, you did this! You wanted to destroy me!" I exhaled slowly. "No, Vanessa. I just reopened the door you tried to lock." The officers guided her toward the car. She twisted back to look at me, fury in her face. But under the flashing lights, that anger looked fragile, like a candle about to go out in the wind. Jacob still hadn't moved. He looked at me, his lips trembling, and stepped closer. "Mom," he whispered, his voice small, like a child waking from a nightmare. "I'm sorry. I just wanted peace. I thought
If everything stayed quiet, everyone could live easier. I looked at him for a long time. His face was gaunt, his eyes dry and hollow, stripped bare of excuses. Peace? I asked softly. Peace doesn't come from silence, Jacob. It comes from stopping before someone gets hurt. He nodded weakly, his breath fogging the air. I didn't know it would go this far. I reached out, resting a hand on his shoulder. No one is born to do wrong, but some keep choosing wrong because they're too afraid to stop. The snow kept falling, thin as silver dust. A passing officer nodded at me. "There'll be a rain soon, Mrs. Reed. You did the right thing." I nodded faintly, my eyes still fixed on Jacob. At that moment, I didn't see a betrayer, only a lost son, standing in the ruins of a home I'd helped build. Across the yard, Vanessa was pushed into the patrol car. The door shut with a hard final click. I looked up. The blue and red lights shimmered in my eyes, the faint glow of justice in winter. Jacob sank to his knees in the snow, face buried in his hands. His sobs broke into the wind, blending with the fading sound of engines. I watched him, my son, who had lost everything, in his desperate reach for peace. I stepped closer, stood beside him for a moment, and said quietly, letting half my words drift with the wind, "Peace built on lies never lasts, my son." He lifted his head, eyes swollen, lips quivering, as if to speak but unable to. And in that look, I saw the same boy who used to hide behind the kitchen door, watching me work late into the night, swearing he'd never let me struggle again. That promise had turned into the chain that bound us both. I didn't hate him. I only pitied the man who'd lost his way inside his own home. And perhaps, in that moment,
He finally understood. Footsteps crunched behind me. Linda appeared, her coat covered in snow, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She placed a firm hand on my shoulder, then clasped my hand tight. Her voice was steady, almost ceremonial. "They took your house," she said, "but they didn't take your dignity." I turned to Linda and saw it, that quiet pride in her eyes, the kind I'd lost long ago. I nodded, a faint smile flickering across my face, thin as a beam of light cutting through a snowstorm. The police were gone. The yard was empty except for footprints, tire tracks pressed deep into the snow, and the cracked teacup still sitting there, on the wooden table, dusted white, releasing one last wisp of steam. I walked over and picked it up. A thin film of frost was beginning to form along its surface, masking the old fracture, but never truly hiding it. I turned it slowly in my hands, listening to the wind weaving through the pines. For the first time in months, I felt real quiet, the kind that doesn't come from fear or pretending, but from the simple relief of having nothing left to hide. I lifted my gaze to the sky. The heavy gray clouds had parted, revealing a narrow band of pale light along the horizon. It wasn't warm, but it was clear, like a reminder that every winter, no matter how long, eventually learns to end. Linda stood beside me, arms folded across her chest, looking up as well. "See that?" she said softly. "Even the sky's exhaling a new beginning." I smiled. "Yes. Maybe for the first time in my life, I don't feel cold anymore." We stood there, two old women wrapped in thick coats, surrounded by snow, watching the faint sunlight slip through the clouds. I felt my breath dissolve into the air, light and easy, carrying with it everything that no longer needed to stay. In the distance, a small sparrow landed on the fence, shook off the snow, and lifted back into the sky. That tiny movement made something in my chest tremble, not from sadness, but from the quiet joy of knowing I could still feel. "Come on," Linda said gently. "We've still got work to do." I nodded, tightening my grip around the cracked cup. "Yes," I said, "but this time not to reclaim, to begin." We started walking, our boots pressing deep into the snow, each step crisp, deliberate, and real, the most honest sound I'd heard in years. Behind us, the pale light spread wider across the gray sky, falling softly on the fading tire tracks. That winter, justice wasn't just a verdict against the guilty. It was a small gift for the once afraid, who finally dared to stand.
6 months later. Spring had come to Portland, though patches of snow still clung to the far hillsides. I sat inside the courtroom, listening as the gavel struck 3 times, sharp, final, echoing like the sound of a door closing on an old chapter of my life. The verdict was read. Vanessa Reed, 22 years. Jacob Reed, 15. The room fell into absolute silence. Vanessa stood between 2 officers, her lips curved in that same practiced smile, the one that once made me believe my daughter-in-law had a gentle heart. But now it looked like cracked paint on an old wall, still glossy, yet unable to hide the rot beneath. Jacob didn't raise his head. When the judge spoke his name, he only tightened his fists and gave a small nod, as if accepting a sentence written long before today. I looked at my son, and what I felt was a weary mix of love, sorrow, and resignation. Some children don't lose their way out of cruelty, but out of fear. And fear, left to fester, can become its own kind of sin. When the hearing ended, I rose slowly. People watched me, some with pity, others with quiet respect. I didn't care either way. I just listened to the sound of my footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. The sound of someone who had walked through an entire season of storms and was still standing. My lawyer caught up to me, holding out a file. "Mrs. Reed, the court's ruled completely in your favor. You've regained full ownership of your estate, plus compensation for damages to your name. The house, the accounts, your husband Arthur's inheritance, everything is yours again." I nodded, thanked him, then turned toward the courthouse window. Outside, the sky was impossibly clear. I thought I should have felt joy, but I didn't. When justice comes late, it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like quiet, tinged with exhaustion. Linda was waiting for me on the courthouse steps. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "It's over, Marion." I shook my head. "No, it's only beginning." That evening, I drove back to the house on the hill, the house that had once been my pride, and later the scene of my undoing. Every hallway, every door, still carried echoes of the past. I walked slowly through the corridor, stopping in the kitchen. The place where I had stood thousands of times to pour tea was now covered in a thin layer of dust. The air held traces of cinnamon, apple pie, and time itself. I opened the cupboard and saw it, the cracked teacup, still resting on the wooden shelf. I lifted it, my fingers brushing the fractured porcelain. It was cold. Cold like the memory of winter that never fully leaves. And in that moment, I understood something. I could never live here again. The next morning, I called a real estate agent. When she asked why I wanted to sell, I simply said, "I'm not selling because I'm afraid. I'm selling because this house has held too many shadows." She looked at me for a moment, then nodded gently. "I understand," she said.
Some houses are meant to live only in memory. I signed the papers in silence. The ink dried quickly, clean, steady, without the tremor that had marked my last signature. When it was done, I closed the folder and felt as if I had just shut the door on a room I'd once loved, once been wounded in, and now was finally brave enough to leave. By late afternoon, I walked the porch one last time. The snow had nearly melted, leaving faint puddles along the steps. Sunlight slanted low, scattering flecks of light across the walls like tiny breaths. I whispered, "Goodbye, house," and turned away toward the road. No tears, no anger, just a soft, hollow calm. The kind that lingers after a storm, when the wind still moves, but gentler than before. 2 months after selling the old house, Linda and I left Portland and drove south toward Oregon's open fields. The road stretched long, pine after pine, and the sky unfolded above us like a wound finally beginning to heal.
We stopped in a small town about an hour outside Eugene. There, a weathered farm sat for sale, a gray roof fading under the sun, an empty barn, and a fence of white slats peeling at the corners. Most people would have called it ruined. I thought it looked honest. No polish, no disguise, just a place waiting to be lived in again. Linda glanced around, then smiled. "See it, Marion? It's not perfect, just like us." I laughed, a light, surprise sound, the first time in years my voice carried without fear. We bought it. No bargaining, no hesitation. A place far enough from the past, close enough to hear ourselves again. On our first morning at the farm, mist covered the fields. Linda and I sat on the wooden porch, each with a cup of tea. The same cracked cup, the one I'd carried from the old house, like a scar that had learned to heal. I poured the tea. Steam curled into the air, mingling with the scent of damp grass. Linda asked, "Do you regret it, selling the house?" I shook my head. No. Some houses belong to memory, not to people. The wind stirred the chimes I'd hung the night before. The sound was soft and clear, the kind that comes from a heart no longer trembling after the storm. I lifted the cup, tracing the hairline crack that ran down its side. The morning light caught it just right, making it glow faintly. "The most beautiful things," I said, "aren't the ones that stay whole. They're the ones that survive their breaking." Linda set down her cup and turned toward me, her eyes warm and proud. "That's true," she said, "and you're living proof of it." I smiled, quietly this time. Inside, something settled. I thought about all I had lost and all I had now. Not possessions, not vindication, but the freedom to breathe, to believe, to begin again. We sat in silence, listening to the wind crossing the meadow. In the distance, a few young deer moved through the fog, their silhouettes soft against the pale hills. The sun rose behind the ridge, spilling gold across the windows. I turned the cup in my hands. The warmth seeped into my palms, steady and real. And I wondered, maybe I'd feared the wrong thing all along. Not loneliness, but the act of facing myself. Now, I could look, straight, clear, and unafraid. Linda stood, pulling her coat tighter. "Time to work, my friend. If we don't, the grass will grow taller than our happiness." I laughed. "Then let me make another pot of tea first. The grass can grow, the tea can't go cold." Linda burst out laughing. Her laughter rang through the morning, breaking into sunlight, mixing with the sound of sparrows at the edge of the field. I looked around the wide stretch of land, wildflowers near the fence, soil ready for new roots, a new place, a new life, and at its center, me, a woman who had once lost everything, now learning how to grow something again, with nothing but 2 hands and a steady heart. I glanced down at the cracked cup and whispered, "We've made it through, haven't we?" The wind brushed the chimes, sending out a single low, resonant note. An answer. That morning, the first light of spring spilled through the kitchen window, glinting off the wooden table where I brewed my tea each day. The Oregon air was gentle, dry, cool, and threaded with the scent of freshly cut grass. I was tying a small bundle of lavender when I heard a car pull up by the gate. It was the mailman, the same kind man in the navy jacket who always greeted me with a nod. "Morning, Mrs. Reed," he said, handing me a small envelope. I took it, expecting another bank notice or advertisement, but when I looked closer, my heart sank softly. It was a small ivory envelope, one corner slightly bent, the handwriting uneven and round, the unmistakable hand of a child. The kind that writes with its whole heart, slow and careful, as if each letter might slip away. I sat down at the table, the envelope before me. Sunlight streamed across it, catching the faint tremble of blue ink. My fingers felt cold. I hadn't opened it yet, but something inside me already knew there was warmth and ache waiting within. I tore the edge gently, as though I were opening an old wound. Inside was a folded sheet of lined paper, smudged at one corner, a bit of eraser dust clinging to the edge. The first line stopped my breath. "Grandma, I miss you." I stared at those words for a long time. They seemed to have their own pulse, slow, honest, without hesitation. The second line leaned slightly to the right. I know Dad was wrong. A streak of ink trailed off the word no, as if her hand had trembled, or maybe she'd cried. And the last line, smaller but steady. "I want to see you." Just 3 lines, no explanations, no apologies, but every word opened a tiny door in my chest, a door that still remembered the warmth of Sophie sitting at the kitchen table, legs swinging, asking how to make mint tea just like Grandma does. My hands shook. Tears fell onto the paper, blurring the ink until it turned from blue to gray. I set it down carefully, afraid to let the words dissolve any further. The letter trembled in the breeze that slipped through the window, and as I watched it, something tender spread through me, a quiet ache that wasn't entirely pain. Because even in all the loss, even after verdicts and years of silence, one thing had survived. Love had never truly died. Outside, the wind stirred the curtains. The chime above the window whispered softly, almost like a voice, saying, "Grandma." I closed my eyes and breathed in deeply. Sometimes, forgiveness doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins with a shaky line written by a small, brave hand. I sat there for a long time, listening to the wind move through the open window and the steady ticking of the clock. Morning light glowed across the paper, still damp with tears. Each of Sophie's words felt like a thread, delicate, trembling, tying me back to something I thought I'd lost forever. I took a fresh sheet of paper and placed it beside her letter. My hands still trembled, but not from pain this time, from something gentler. The ink flowed easily, quietly, as if it already knew what to say. I wrote slowly, one word at a time, as if speaking across all the distance and hurt between us. "I'll be waiting, my dear, in the little house where the light is always on." When I finished, I read it again. Just one simple sentence, but enough to say that somewhere in this wide, uncertain world, there was still a place, small, steady, and full of love, that hadn't gone dark. Outside, the sun had risen high. Light streamed through the kitchen window, glinting off the cracked teacup on the table. I set Sophie's letter beside it, right next to the hairline fracture that had long turned faintly yellow. Steam curled upward, warm, clear, and calm, like a soul softened by forgiveness. Linda came in, her hands still covered in soil from planting rows of carrots. She looked at me, then at the letter. From Sophie? I nodded, smiling faintly. She misses me. Of course she does, Linda said, her voice turning gentle. Blood never disappears, no matter how badly the grown-ups mess things up. I didn't reply. I just slid the teacup toward her. We sat in silence, sipping slowly. Outside, sparrows chirped on the roof, and the wind brushed through the pine trees, the rustle of leaves sounding like an old song played again after years of quiet. I ran my fingers over the creases in the paper, not to hide it away, but to remember it. I realized I didn't need photographs or verdicts or signed papers anymore. All I needed were those few lines, proof that something true had survived everything else. After a while, Linda rose and left me alone, the kitchen filled with that familiar kind of silence, the silence of someone who has traveled far enough not to be afraid of looking back. I breathed deeply, watching the steam fade in the sunlight. I remembered it all, the old house, the cold nights, the whispers at 2 a.m, the crack in the floor, and that single moment when I finally chose myself. All of it folded together now, no longer a sequence of tragedies, but a journey. A brutal one, yes, but a real one. I stood and opened the porch door. Sunlight flooded the room, warming every corner. I lifted my teacup and stepped outside. Before me, the sun climbed over the ridge of pines, its rays piercing the thin veil of morning fog, golden threads stitching up a torn sky. I looked toward that light, my heart light as breath after a long dream, and softly, almost to myself, I said the words that had carried me through everything. You can take my house, but not my spirit. The sound drifted into the air, not as defiance anymore, but as something steadier, quieter, a truth that had settled deep, calm, and unshakable. I sat on the porch steps, the teacup warm between my palms. In the distance, a bird crossed the open sky. I smiled and whispered, and maybe, one day, she'll come back, not to apologize, but to begin again. The steam rose, curling into the light. An old chapter closed, a new season began, and I, the woman once driven from her own home, had finally found her way back. That winter has long passed. The old house is gone, but its warmth still lingers in every morning I pour my tea. Maybe that's what it means to live, to lose something, so we can finally learn how to keep ourselves. I tell this story not for pity, but for anyone who's ever been betrayed, anyone who's ever had to begin again. To remind you, sometimes the crack doesn't break us. It simply opens a path, a place where the light can come through. Thank you for listening, for staying until the end. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. Tell me what you felt, or simply write, I understand. And don't forget to subscribe, so each day you can hear another story about those who seemed fragile, yet somehow became the most beautiful survivors of all their winters.